Welcome back to CG Cup with Thomas Chamberlain, who created a piece which has exactly the right pizzazz. it's just fucking amazing. I love everything about it, and I'm really curious how you got there. How's it going? Everything good on your side?
It's good, thank you. It was a lot of fun putting this together. You're right, nailing it on the head with the pizzazz. I wanted to make it as fabulous and flamboyant, exuberant as possible.
Yes,
like all of the buzzwords, all of the things that make it sort of pop from the screen. So
it's all in there. Even the background is just adding everything on top. It's like
I say, because at first, starting out with something flat in the background, it's sort of like, it makes it easier to draw attention to the character, but I was like, I need to do something more with it, something that really like emphasizes specific parts of the pose and things like that.
It's like moving in the background. It's like, and he's like,
exactly, the flow's going through. and actually, I also tried to sneak in the extra bits about the story. So the original brief about the portal that the court made, there's a little subtle sort of portal thing in the background, and so he's just come through this kind of swirling fog into the new realm. And
dude, did you put an Evangelion cross right in there or something?
Yeah. So exactly. So just like Evangelion and its kind of vague relation to Christianity, and the same thing I've done here with kind of the holy water and stuff like that. I was like, I think I'll just sneak a little cross in there, because it looks cool.
I didn't see it. My eyes were all on the fucking golden mustache, man. I didn't even put any attention there. This is just great. Dude, let's jump into it. I want to see how you got there.
I think the first thing I do in my process is to basically just start tidying everything up. So after the complete chaos of the beginning, where we talked about all kinds of ideas, we went all over the place with the design, I decided we need to get organized. So I took the PSD that I had, those are different sort of scattered layers, bits of reference, ideas and things, and having settled on which elements I wanted to include, I could now start to organize that into their own folders, actually name the layers in my Photoshop document, which it's very easy to forget to do, but it's great to slow down and actually put that level of organization in, because it's going to speed things up a bunch later on. Mm-hmm. Something which I noticed, and I will do quite a bit, is that this organization stage often does come afterwards, after the sort of the initial push for ideas, because that way it doesn't limit you when you're thinking about what could potentially go into a design. I find that if you're trying to name things and like put stuff in folders as you go, you're already sort of categorizing things as important or not important, or you're putting barriers up that prevent you from putting in a new idea. It's like the golden mustache, for example. If I was trying to label every sort of idea that I had and put it in a folder, then I might be like, oh, well, that's not important enough to put in a folder, and it gets forgotten and pushed to the side, all that kind of thing. And so really I found that it wasn't the best way to go. And so my process now is to always chuck everything into the PSD and organize later. So yeah, having organized all my thoughts into different folders, name the layers, all that kind of thing, I now have a much better idea of the research I need to do to flesh out these ideas. So I'm searching for various bits of historical information, things which aren't purely visual, things that can lead me on to find specific visuals that I can then get reference for. So at first it was searching for essentially what religion or what state of Christianity 17th century France was in. So that I can start to see, am I going to push it into more Catholic, more Protestant, all that kind of thing. I have very little historical knowledge of this kind of thing, despite how interesting it can be. So it's at this point, it's just great to go through and find as much information about this as possible. I can then bring in the important bits and tease out pieces which will lead to visual ideas, and also just flesh out the backstory of the character. I think at this point I'll start to put everything into a big mind map. So something which we didn't really do at the beginning was we put in little notes of ideas, but they're quite random, and the mind map will sort of essentially help you link everything together. So you can start with your brief and split the brief into the sort of the key features of the brief. And this means you've kind of got this link which shows any idea that you have and you've put into your design. You can see where it's come from. Has it come through the route of the link to the monarchy? Has it come through the link of the leprechauns? Or has it come through the religious ties? And knowing sort of the root of any particular idea means you know how to flavor it. So if the weapon is... jumping ahead a bit, the sword, for example, the design of that is both sort of the expensive regal influence, but also it's been modified so that it can fight these demons, these enemies of the church. And so in its design, I want to make sure that I'm now drawing from both of those elements. And it's really useful to have that pathway mapped out.
What we don't see is the leprechauns or something, right? Like the actual creatures that they are hunting are not seen, but you probably tapped into the information that they need, like the whole gold hunting thing and diamonds and all that. This is basically what you were concentrating on, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to go further, I have some sketches of the leprechauns and things that will pop up later on, because I couldn't resist designing them. They're such a fun idea, and they're so important to the character that I've got sketches and things of those that come later on. The leprechauns, and firstly, exactly what the brief gives me. So in this case, they turn to gold and diamonds upon death, and then leading on from that, because I've already looked into sort of the Musketeers and what kind of personality or what kind of tools they'll use, I can start to think about how it will interact with the leprechauns. So in this case, some of the more dark ideas that we had during our first discussion of it, if they're turning into diamonds and gold, well, what's exactly the sort of function, the mechanism of that? If you sever a limb, does that limb just turn into gold and diamonds, and then the rest of the body remains alive? I like that idea. So going on from that, it's like you sever a limb and you're going to get less diamonds and gold. It's less stuff turning into that. And also, if it's turning into it sort of in real time, is there perhaps some link to the rate at which the body's sort of dying or something? So a somewhat dark idea is that perhaps to get the biggest diamonds, you have to cause a slower death, perhaps. We're making the Musketeers evil, that they're not good people. Because ultimately what I settled on for the design of them is that they are really sort of prancing around under the pretense of working for the church and sort of fighting against this evil scourge, and being this sort of loyal to the king and just doing their duty. Of course, their payoff is that they're getting their social standing with the king. They're getting riches and gold. They're also the central of attention. Everyone's praising them, being like, "These are our heroes. They're saving us from the demons from this other realm." So, for me, making them look bad or certainly making their actions very bad, seemed to be the right way to go. And their methods of luring the leprechauns out and things like that, using the fairies as lures by sort of like finding them in this bottle and torturing them, or whatever it is. That ties into it as well. So anyway, I lay out all of these ideas because they will then sort of interact with how I design the weapons and character later on. this is where I specifically go into each weapon. So I have made a list of the weapons I want the character to have. It's the rapier with its holy scabbard. They have the lure, which is going to be something that uses one of the fairies to lure in leprechauns. And then there's going to be the musket. And so for all of these, I want to get in historical information to make it sure I'm setting it in the time period. I then want to bring in purely sort of visual information, things that I personally think look really cool, because that's the stuff I want to include into the design. And on top of that, the character is going to be using the musket to make it a more interesting and dynamic pose. So just getting some reference of exactly how they would be held, how they'd be handled by the musketeer, to make sure that I'm not going wildly off base with what that looks like. Interestingly, with the musket specifically, because I want these people to look far more focused on their appearance and rather than the actual practicality of their design, I end up having him holding his musket one-handed, because what better way to show off than use a two-handed weapon with one? He's sort of thrusting it out as if he was fencing or something, which it's sort of one of those ideas which is potentially sort of slightly too strange, where either you look at it and you think that's great, it's, you know, it really captures his personality or whatever, the ridiculousness of it, or you could look at it and be like, well, that's not how a musket works. So it's treading that line, but ultimately we're in a fantasy sort of.
It's maybe kind of like when you watch movies like Equilibrium or something, and they're doing all this stuff with the guns and all that. You know, have you seen that movie?
I haven't seen Equilibrium.
Really? Equilibrium with Christian Bale? That's you gotta
I'll
check
put that on my list.
It's a gem. And they're having this thing which is kind of like a combination between martial arts and shooting. So they're having all like doing all that stuff there, you know, like to quickly kill all kinds of enemies and do all that stuff. And
so it's sort of like, it looks cool, but the whole point of firearms is for ranged combat. So
I'm not sure how effective this actually is, but looking at the last John Wick movies, I think it got pretty real at some point. I'm not a specialist when it comes to that, but it looked more like pizzazz.
Right, yeah. It's for the show.
Yeah, I think so too. But maybe it's
no, that's cool. I mean, this is the interesting thing when searching for references, is that sometimes you come across an element like that where you see people using firearms like this up close, and it's just something which you have never come across before and feels unintuitive or feels like it's made up. But there's this strange sense that when you find it in some sort of historical document, it suddenly legitimizes it. And you're like, that's a really cool idea that I want to use. So, to quickly touch on the design here. So I've gathered some reference and I'm putting together my design for the musket. Sketching it out like this before I try and design it on the character. There are things that I change when I put it onto the character so that it sort of has it balances with them correctly when they're holding it. But it's great to have an ideal idea of what sort of how the shapes will flow into each other, because it's easy to miss out on that stuff if you're focusing on perspective and that kind of construction when drawing it with the entire piece. So having these sort of almost as like creating your own little reference sheet, you can see I'll do this for all of the items, and then I can have that to the side as I design and add them to the actual musketeer. As far as the sort of thoughts that go into this design in particular, I love the flow of these weapons, and you can see what I've tried to do as best as possible is to have this one continuous flow that kind of the curve of the lines constantly accelerates towards the tip. So there's this real sort of fast motion out towards the edge. And in fact, if I just do a quick a little breakdown of what I'm talking about there.